Well, good morning.
Good morning.
It's good to see you on this beautiful Sunday morning. I'm a big fan of the old radio dramas. Love some of them. And this morning's reading, I highly recommend that whole chapter to you, because that reading reminds me of a whole lot of an old radio drama called Escape. And Escape began like this. It's William Conrad's voice reading this. Tired of the everyday grind? Ever dream of a life of romantic adventure? Want to get away from it all? We offer you Escape. That's what I felt when I read this one today. Now, let me ask you all, what is your attitude when you're facing a challenge? What is your set of mind when you've got a challenge in front of you? How do you get your mind wrapped around it correctly before you move in to solve the problem? Well, I can suggest we can be like the young David, who said to King Saul when he volunteered to face Goliath, this is what he said: "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And whenever a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck it down, rescuing the lamb from its mouth. And if it turned against me, I would catch it by the jaw, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, since he has defied the armies of the living God." You see, young David knew where his strength came from and how to be prepared. And we're going to explore that today so we can be prepared as well. We have ourselves a situation here that is a battle of champions. On the one side, we have King Saul and the army of Israel. Their forces are camped on the mountains between Socoh and Azekah. I almost want to say Azteca, that's not right. Azekah. The Philistine forces are across the valley on the opposite mountain range. They're facing each other. They fully intend the field between them, the valley between them, to become the field of combat. Now, each day, one soldier came down from the Philistine side. One massive, well-armed soldier, taller than most, strode out into the valley to challenge one Israelite soldier to come down and face him in single combat to the death. And whoever won, their whole army won. Whoever lost, the whole army lost. This is a serious challenge. And this came from the belief that you brought your gods into battle. Israel brought the God, not gods, God into battle. And the outcome was determined by whose deity was the strongest. Didn't hurt, of course, when you strode out onto that field with a massive soldier, well armored, as the Philistine did, and your people are mercenaries by trade. Now, we have another character we have to talk about here before we get on with the battle here, and that's this other person that comes on the scene. Now, Jesse is David's elderly father, and he has 8 sons. And his 3 oldest strapping sons have joined the army of Israel and are on that mountainside, and Jesse's concerned about them. And he sends his youngest son, David, who's a shepherd, off with food for his sons and cheese for the commander. Never hurts to have the commander on the side of your sons. And he asks for news from them and a token that they're well from these older brothers. He wants to know how they're faring. And at one point in this passage, David is described as only a youth, ruddy and handsome. Well, that's one point of view. But there's another that's listed there. The oldest brother of David sees him coming, and he's aggravated by his youngest brother's questions from their father and from his own questions about how the battle is going. No doubt he's already nettled and annoyed because they've been sitting on that hillside for 40 days now. 40 days where this Philistine comes down and challenges them, and 40 days where none of them go out to meet him, including the oldest brother. This cannot be sitting very well, and David's asking, how's it going? You can imagine there's a little sibling tension there. And so, he demands to know why David is there. And he says of him, why have you left the few sheep you're tending? And who did you leave them with? And he goes on to say, you, David, are presumptuous. You have an evil heart. And he dismisses David as just somebody who wants to spectate at this battle. Now, that's some pretty poor estimation of your character coming from your oldest brother. But this may result in part from his older brother knowing a little bit about David's character and the fact that he has been very interested in hearing that the winner, if the winner of the combat is the soldier from Israel, that King Saul is going to reward that person greatly financially, and the king's daughter's hand in marriage is being offered up, and freedom for the entire family of the victor. And, well, his older brother suspects that some of the interest David has something to do with all of this potential fame and fortune. And some traditions would say as well that David's father thought David was a little slow, and that's why he sent him out to send the sheep. Others would say that when Samuel came to Jesse, David's father's house, looking for the king of Israel that had been chosen by God, that he completely overlooked David because David was playing. Until God said pointedly to Samuel, why are you sitting down when the one I have chosen is standing? Oops. So there's conflicting views on what David is like. But David has spent a whole lot of time out in the wilderness. And what do we know about the wilderness? The wilderness is where you go when you want to have an encounter with God. The wilderness in the Bible is where you can expect God to come to you, where you can expect miracles, where you can expect messages from God, where you can expect to see God's hand in motion. And David has spent a whole lot of time out there in the wild places with his sheep and with God. And for whatever reason, young David, the family shepherd, has decided to do what no soldier trained up to the army of Israel has been willing to do. And he's going to fight and vanquish the massive Goliath. And the soldiers hear about this, and so they hustle him right on up to the king. For whatever reason, maybe just to see what the king does with this kid. And the king recoils and says, you're a boy. Don't you know Goliath is a warrior and he has been doing this ever since he was your age? You'll be taken apart. But that is where David gave his response from the beginning of this sermon, and it was so convincing that Saul says, okay, we'll let you try. Because David is convinced of the justice of God. David has been sustained through crises before. He has faced wild lions and bears intent on eating his sheep. And he understands that it is not by his strength that he beat them, but by God's opposition to all prey to human happiness and human well-being, whether it comes from beast or man. After the speech, David is forever remembered as the shepherd king. with great concern for all of his flock, whether it be Israelites or the world. Is it any surprise that Jesus comes from that line? Because that sounds a whole lot like Jesus' level of concern for humanity. David is certain that God's justice will preserve faithful people and those who can't defend themselves. David is determined that he is going to be God's agent. And Saul is convinced. He blesses him. The king blesses him, yields to God's way and God's will. But how many times, I want you to think back, has someone tried to be helpful to you when you're about to undertake an endeavor, gives you a bunch of stuff they think will help you out, and it's problematic at best? Well, this is what happens to David, because Saul decides that David is going to need his armor. He's given the king's armor. Well, back in the day, and still today, a lot of times, rulers and leaders are chosen by their height, if nothing else. Tall people tend to rule, whether they're good at it or not, in many cases. There it is. So, David is our young, ruddy youth. And then there's Saul, and then there's Goliath. But Saul has given David his armor. And he straps it on, and he gets the sword out, and he says, I can't do this. This is ridiculous. And he drops it all. He says, I can't go out this way. It's not what God has trained me up to do. Instead, he picks up his shepherd's staff. He puts 5 stones into his pouch, the pouch he has at his waist, and he picks up a sling. He prefers speed to armor, and he prefers his faith in God as his armor. So, if you don't know the story, David seems woefully unprepared to face Goliath. And I'm sure the first hearers were going, what? Oh my. Leaving the king's armor behind, David heads down to the plain to face Goliath. Off the mountain, down into the plain, watched by 2 armies. Here comes this kid with a staff. And Goliath, he's a Philistine. He is a soldier of many years. He comes from a people known for being mercenaries, a people who have been causing trouble from Syria to Egypt, a people who have gone out and knocked over Bronze Age empires. And he comes out to face David. And Goliath is tall. And the way it's written is to remind the people that are hearing it of the legends of old of Israel, of giants. And what giants were. And giants were forever evil. They were bringers of chaos. And when you had a story of someone who was going to rise up, a young man who's on a journey, and he's going to be a hero, he passes through childhood and into adulthood by defeating a giant. So all of that background has gone into this person, and that's what people are hearing, and that's what they're picturing, is this chaotic character, this evil individual. And here goes David up against that. And not only this, but he has a bronze helmet on. He's wearing heavy chainmail. He's got a massive spear. Everybody's noticed that from a distance. He has a bronze javelin on his back. He's got a sword in his hand. And on top of all that, he's got a fellow soldier of his, a friend, a trusted ally, who's carrying a shield that goes almost from the ground to his chin, who's standing in front of him, ready to defend this soldier against anything David would throw at him. He comes down confident, and he is the very embodiment of a predator. That's who Goliath is. He's got many years of experience in this. And Goliath approaches David, and he looks at him, and he roars in displeasure, "Am I a dog that you've come to me with sticks?" what are you doing? And Goliath calls David the lowest of the low when he calls him a dog. But David, he's immune to that. He's been a shepherd for years. That's the lowest of the low on the working scale to his people. So being called a dog by somebody doesn't mean anything. And young David approaches with his staff and his sling and his pouch of stones. David, who so many have underestimated. His brother feels he's evil-hearted and has come here to be an onlooker, to gawk at the action that's coming. He's a shepherd with a few sheep, according to his brother. His father, Jesse, perhaps, sent him to protect the sheep because he thought he was a little dim. And the prophet Samuel overlooked him because he's just that plain boy over there when he was seeking God's chosen king. But David knows better than any of them. David has dealt with dangerous predators before. And as God's agent, he's certain that he can do it again. He's sizing up Goliath as he approaches. He's looking for an advantage and an opportunity. Now, how many times have we faced troubles that appear Goliath's size? Goliath fierce and Goliath dangerous. And how many times have we been underestimated by the world as we've gone to do so? And how many times has God seen us through? That's one of the reasons we come together to worship, to remind ourselves how many times in the past God has already seen us through, and as God has promised never to leave us. It's one of the reasons we get together. David and Goliath approach each other across the grass with two armies watching them, their attention riveted to them from either mountainside. There's no escape what's about to happen, and Goliath, the seasoned soldier, confident behind his modern armor, his shield held by his trusted friend, a sword, a javelin, and a spear are with him that are all familiar tools of his trade. He knows them as well as he knows the back of his hand. And he does what soldiers do at this point. He taunts his opponent. He taunts David. It's customary, it's expected. And he tells this child, who's been tending sheep up till now, the child who was intended to just go by his father and deliver some food and some cheese and to come home with news, he says to him, I'm going to feed you to the unclean birds of the air and the wild animals, the beasts. And that means, in case you don't know, what he was really saying is, I intend to completely disgrace you. And when I kill you, you will know before you go down that you have been abandoned by the army and by your God. That's what I'm going to do to you. That's what the taunt meant. Goliath believes firmly in his own strength and he thinks he's self-sufficient. He doesn't need anyone else. And he's going to crush this child. David approaches and he returns taunt for taunt. And he says, I'm going to strike you down. I'm going to show victory over you. And I'm not going to stop there. I'm going to strike down your army. All of you are going to be fed to the birds and to the beasts, because the world is going to know that the God of Israel is a God who doesn't save with sword and spear. The battle is the Lord's, and he will hand you over to me. And he says this, some say, in a calculating manner, because when David mentioned those dirty birds that are carrion eaters, that were feared by people back in the day, he said Goliath looked upward at that moment. And when he did, he gives David his chance. And David runs forward and he loads the sling that until now has been overlooked, the sling that obviously Goliath does not understand. This is the sling that has killed lions and bears. This is the sling that the slingmen of Israel took into battle, and it made them the equivalent of archers. They could kill from a distance with a well-aimed stone. And that's what David has and is beginning to wind up as he runs towards Goliath, who has looked up, and when he looks up, there's a gap between his helmet and his visor, and his forehead is exposed, and he slings that rock. And Goliath crashes down on his face. That's the story. And Israel would lift up David, this king of mixed qualities. They would give him immense power. They turned their freedom over to him. They would give him honor. They would give him things that should have been given to God, who David rightly declares is the real victor in this battle, the real source of his own strength and his own courage and that of everyone else. I've just been reading a book by Rachel Held Evans, and she talks in the early 2000s of a Christian couple in India who rescued a young mother and her daughter. They're lower caste members. They had come down with HIV when HIV was just sweeping the country. A fearful time. And the community had shunned them. There was no work for the mother. There was no school for the daughter because they weren't sure how this was transmitted, and they were scared. But this couple took them in and trained the mother, got her a job, got schooling for their child, made sure they had work and a way to make a living. And Christians in India have been moving into the slums at that point. They were working amongst people with leprosy and who were HIV positive, who were disabled. They were giving generously to the poor, and they were allowing their reputation to go into the dumpster. By working with the lowest class, they did not care what other people would say about them. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Weren't worried about their reputation. They were the underdogs facing the cultural giants of fear of India. Now, the Lubavitch Hasidic Jews of Brooklyn in New York City have chosen underdog champions of their own to help them face the absolute Goliath giant of anti-Semitism that's rising up in their community. They turned to Curtis Sliwa, an unarmed group that doesn't even have slings, a crime prevention team known as the Guardian Angels. And they're known for a particular jacket and a particular beret that they wear. And they walk through the community. And they are known. And hate crimes dropped. Sliwa said no one is going to commit an act of violence while we're around. Two examples of David-type responses to Goliath-sized problems. We have to have David's faith in God's presence and God's strength and God's lifetime of training of us for facing the struggles that are to come together, no matter how humble we feel our training has been. Whatever Goliath-sized challenges approach, remember that the victory will be God's, and have faith. Use the gifts that God has given us. Never mind the negative labels and the dismissals that will come from mere mortals, and stride forward to face those challenges squarely. Practice this every day, and we will live an amazing life together with God. Let us pause for a moment of silent reflection. Amen. Please rise for hymn.